You're kidding, right? Ryler asked, looking back and forth between the two Invarian men. Why would Barry demote you? Why, indeed, Uncle Ivan said. There was a sound like a light scuffle and a falling chair, and more laughter. Janus turned to look, and the crowd shifted just enough for him to see. It was Craig, Lyra, and their cronies. They're enjoying a celebratory drink down in Janus's world, instead of the central hub of the dome where they belong. They were polluting the whole floor with the loudness of their revels. Something about the cold hardness of Lyra's face, even when she was partying, made everything Janus had heard tonight click into place like a hand-milled part. Avon had been wrong about the cult, and Janus had to be wrong to think it was bad luck. The machine wasn't broken. Lyra Alencourt had fed him into the gears. He didn't know how she'd done it, but it couldn't be a coincidence. He got his legs cut out from under him the same day he embarrassed her. Something wrong, nephew? Uncle Ivan asked with reptilian slyness, another shot already in his hand. Janus felt sick. Part of that was because of the 3 shots sitting in his mostly empty stomach, eating its way through his stomach lining like battery acid. The other part was Lyra's face, especially when one of her companions tapped her shoulder and pointed. Her eyes met Janus's across the room, and she smiled like a psychopath with a new pet. Hey, Ryler said, snapping his fingers in front of Janus's eyes. Come on. Lyra didn't get you fired, demoted, Janus said, turning back to the bar, his friend, and his uncle. Whatever. She doesn't have that kind of pull. Not unless she somehow drummed up enough witnesses to charge you with assault. You hit her? Uncle Ivan asked, surprised. I didn't touch her, Janus said, although remembering his own balled fists and how Lyra had gotten into his face. Maybe that had been what she was after. He looked at Ryler, who Janus knew was more reliable and better connected than his washed-out uncle. If not her, then who? Let's get some food. And you can tell me what you know, Ryler answered. Fine, Janus said, turning away from Lyra and her friends. Barry and Ryler were right. Janus was pissed. He'd drunk too much too fast on an empty stomach, and he was letting his uncle egg him on. That wasn't how Janus usually solved things. He studied the problem, figured out what the best long-term solution was, and implemented it even if that made other people think he was scared or incompetent. It was results that mattered, not politics and what people thought of him. Hey, Invarian, Lyra said right behind him. A note from the author Void Runner, Sci-Fi survival adventure. Lore. Heat management. Everyone knows that space is cold, but mostly, space is empty. In a vacuum, there is no ozone or cloud layer to reflect or deflect sunlight. No air convection to spread heat evenly across a planet. And no open water to act as a heat sump. Heat that cannot be reflected or insulated must be radiated back into the void in the form of infrared radiation. There are many reasons why a settlement might start to collapse on Irkalla: maintenance failures, environmental cascades, civil unrest, or epidemics, to name a few. Regardless of how it begins, hyperthermia is almost always how it ends, destroying crops, bursting pipes, frying electrical systems, and forcing the evacuation of the remaining population. Chapter 4. Tartarus, Prime Dome planet. There were some problems you just couldn't ignore. He knocked back his fourth shot, set it down, and turned to face his nemesis. What do you want, Lyra? She was a few inches shorter than him, so she had to lift her chin slightly to look down on him. I just wanted to see what a loser looks like up close. Janus took in the hatred in Lyra's eyes, the scorn of her curled upper lip, her invasion of his space taunting him to shove her while 12 years of Prime Dome living told him Dome Sec would blame him no matter who started the fight. Come on, Lyra, Ryler said, stepping between them. It's a big bar. We're just here to have a drink. I don't need you to defend me, Janus said, gently pulling Ryler back. Is there a problem? Craig said, walking up to stand beside his second. Aren't the two of you supposed to be training for the trials? Uncle Ivan asked. There's no problem, Janus said before Craig and Lyra could focus on his uncle. We're just going to finish our drinks and go somewhere else. Lyra looked at him with utter contempt. You really are a coward, Invarian. You're outsider trash. I guess it's fitting you're going to be sorting trash while Craig and I go win the trials for Prime Dome. What did you say? Janus asked, blood rushing to his face. His hands balled into fists of their own accord, and he felt himself tensing to finally put Lyra back into her place. She said she's not worthy of being this dome's aspirant, or even his second, Uncle Ivan said, pulling Ryler aside to stand next to his nephew. Who in the void's name are you? Lyra asked, glaring at him. Lyra, Craig started, apparently recognizing Uncle Ivan and turning pale, but Janus's uncle cut him off. Getting my nephew bumped down to sorting? That was smart, Uncle Ivan said. You didn't have the leverage to do it yourself. So you convinced your friend Craig to do it because his daddy is a sector administrator, and he lets you look over personnel assignments. He looked at Craig. Did she tell you to assign an extra QA to this sector? Or did you figure that out on your own? You don't have to answer that. Lyra snapped. We should go, Craig said. For some reason, Janus's uncle was scaring him, although all he was doing was talking. Uncle Ivan grinned. It made the big man seem even bigger, and people around the group were starting to back away. That's the thing, Ms. Allencourt. Being smart and knowing how the system works was the right way to deal with Janus. He's politically naive, just like his parents were. And even though there's more to this than you think, and the cult is pulling your strings, I'd have let it slide and cleaned it up once you were gone. But you had to come over here and gloat, didn't you? Janus looked at Ryler, and his friend shrugged. It was like an imposter had stolen his uncle's identity. His words were sharp and authoritative, like he had the whole dome by the chassis, and all he had to do was squeeze. Lyra sneered at Uncle Ivan, refusing to give ground. If you know so much, you know I'm untouchable, so it doesn't matter if... There was no warning. 1 minute, Lyra was mouthing off to Janus's uncle, and the next she was reeling back, almost falling to the floor, until a woman behind her caught her by the arm. Blood was spurting from her nose, and her eyes had gone wild. Security? She screeched. Janus stepped forward, too. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do, but he had to stop this before it escalated. Security. I've been assaulted, Larry yelled, activating the panic function on her wrist comm. Ryler pulled Janus back. I want that man arrested. And the people with him. Shield. Ollie. Lyra snapped as two members of Dome security pushed through the crowd. I have witnesses. Craig wasn't saying a word. He was just trying to pull Lyra away, but she was dripping blood and wouldn't have it. You should take me in, Uncle Ivan told the DomeSec officers, holding out the wrist implanted with his ID. Just me. One officer grabbed his shoulder, while the other scanned his wrist, then frowned and scanned it again. Take me in now, officers, Uncle Ivan growled, and to Janus's utter surprise, the officers looked at each other, as worried as Craig, and obeyed, pulling Uncle Ivan through the crowd. That's right, Lyra yelled as Craig dragged her the other way. You're trash, Invarian. You. And your whole outsider family. And the Dome you came from. And I'm going to see that every one of you pays for what you did. Come on, Janus, Ryler said, paying the tab with a gesture and leading him toward the exit. Janus let himself be led. He thought he was going to spend that night getting drunk, getting closer to Ryler and his uncle, and maybe coming up with a plan to fit the Dome's expectations for Callie's sake. Instead, he'd found out he would never fit in. At least not if people like Lyra had anything to say about it. And now his uncle was headed to jail. The temperature was dropping, but things were already heating up inside the Dome before Ryler and Janus had made it a block away. Janus heard the news spread, saw the residents' eyes glowing blue as they accessed some blog post or video on the newsphere, and jumped to their own conclusion. Someone had attacked the lead aspirant. No, it was his second. Either that, or the aspirant had gotten injured protecting someone else. Who was responsible? An immigrant. A jilted lover. A saboteur from another Dome, perhaps. The rumors were running faster than facts. Janus had thought this was the worst night of his life, right up until the moment he saw a trio of outsiders, Beta Station survivors, from their coveralls, get surrounded by a group of angry locals, and he and Ryler had to duck down a side street instead of taking the direct route home. This night was going to hurt a lot more people than just him. He saw another group vandalizing a store, and a third group actually set fire to a waste collection unit. Those were just the incidents Janus and Ryler saw. Hazard alerts were popping off all over the sector. Callie pinged him on his comm that Janus didn't have the attention to spare. He sent her a short message. I'm safe. I'm heading home. Don't leave the hab. This is crazy, Ryler said. Janus wished he was more surprised. Over 200,000 residents lived in Prime Dome's main enclosure, with an average of 30,000 transients and another 50 to 60,000 people squashed into outlying shelters and pressurized farms. It was a small population compared to what Janus's history classes had taught him about old Earth. But it had to be the largest single settlement humanity had left, since the survivor took the remnant and left the genocidal war with the machines behind. Settlements like Prime Dome were more fragile than they looked, prone to cascade failures like the events that destroyed Prometheus Base. They lived on a narrow margin of safety, extinction dogging their steps. And if they didn't place in that year's trials, if they couldn't participate because the lead aspirant wasn't vacuum qualified, then the entire Dome would suffer. Why did he do it? Ryler asked. What? Your uncle. He must have had a good reason. Janus looked around the corner of the warehousing facility they'd gone around, then waved Ryler forward. You give the old man that much credit, Ryler. He was pounding shots as fast as he could order, and you don't accord him the respect he's due, Ryler said, more sharply than Janus was used to from his friend. Was he right? Or was it just his weird religious bias showing its head? If he were to give Ivan more laurels than he deserved, he might say Janus had been about to take a swing at Lyra, and his uncle had done the job for him, including getting sent to jail. What Janus couldn't account for were all those things he'd said about the cult of the survivor and prime dome politics. Where had that come from? Craig and Lyra hadn't tried to deny his accusations. But how would Ivan, an outsider like him, know anything about what a pair of hub socialites were plotting the same day it happened? Look, maybe there's more to this than my uncle losing his temper. And maybe Lyra had it coming. But none of that matters. He's heading to jail, and I need to get back to Cali. Agreed, Ryler said. For now, Janus's heart rose into his throat as a pair of dome-sec troopers with stun rods rounded the corner and yelled, You there! Stop! Do we run? Ryler asked. Don't be an idiot, Janus said, raising his hand. There were places to hide inside the dome, but not many. And Janus didn't have that kind of contact with the underworld. Janus Invarian. We've been ordered to escort you back to your quarters, the dome-sec troopers said, approaching. What? All? Why? Janus asked, putting his hands back down. Didn't ask, and no one told me? The trooper answered. Now come on. Dome admin is about to slap a curfew down on this whole sector. I'd better head home, Ryler said. The trooper looked him over, eyes glowing blue as he accessed Ryler's personnel files. You do that, Mr. Abraxas. Maybe reconsider keeping company with outsiders in the future. Ryler looked at the trooper with contempt. One of these days, trooper, you're going to feel ashamed of what you just said. For your sake, I hope it's soon. Callie looked up as Janus walked into the apartment and met his eyes. She looked relieved, then worried again. Uncle Ivan. Janus shook his head and locked the door. Dome security took him to lock up. He punched Lyra. What? Oh, Callie said, sitting up. Why? Janus wasn't sure himself. He was coming down off his earlier buzz, and the alcohol drained the anger away with it, leaving him lost and a little nauseous. He needed food and sleep, and he still needed to be up for early shift in less than 7 hours. The last thing he wanted to do was explain to his sister the many ways in which he'd failed her, but hiding things didn't fix them. The odds of this problem just going away had gone from slim to none. He took a deep breath and told her everything. Starting from his verbal battle with Lyra and Craig that morning, to his getting demoted and the meaning behind it. Then he told her about their uncle and everything they had to deal with. He also told her about the groups of Prime Dome dwellers accosting outsiders on the streets, and how she'd have to be careful of her surroundings on her way to school, her new school. He hadn't been sure what to expect from her. His sister was a skinny little thing, but she was tough. She rarely asked for help. She got angry instead of scared, and she always fought when cornered. The only thing he hadn't expected from her was calm resignation. It's going to be okay. What? You busy here? What? How is any of this okay? Janus asked incredulously. I've got until next week. I can finish my project. Janus was dumbstruck. Callie. Screw the project. We've got bigger issues. No, we don't, Callie said firmly, balling her hands into fists on her knees. The people here have always hated us, and this planet has been trying to kill us since before we were born. We do what Mom always said. We do our best, and we make things better. And we trust other people to do the same, Janus asked, finishing the quote. No, Callie said, looking up at him, and it broke his heart. We survive. We fight. And we steal if we have to. And we move on if we're not wanted. But until then, until people let us down, we do our best, because that's what Mom and Dad would have wanted. Ooh, taught you that? Uncle Ivan, Callie said. Janus felt a flush of heat at the thought of Uncle Ivan teaching his particular brand of misanthropy to Callie while Janus was at work.